Are you ready to explore the unknown? Dive into the world of the strange, mysterious, and unexplained with Eerie Expeditions magazine. Each issue is packed with spine-tingling tales, cutting-edge paranormal investigations, and exclusive insights into hauntings, cryptids, UFOs, and more. Whether you're a seasoned investigator or just love a good ghost story, Eerie Expeditions magazine has something for you. Join our growing community of truth seekers and adventure lovers. Subscribe today at EerieExpeditionsMagazine.com and unlock the secrets of the supernatural. Are you ready? That's EerieExpeditionsMagazine.com, where the extraordinary is just a click away. Dare to discover.
Welcome to the Gateway, broadcasting live from the edge of the Mojave where the strange slips through the cracks. We are live on United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM New Orleans. I'm your host this evening, C.L. Thomas. Tonight we are going to talk about one of my favorite topics. I'm going to admit it. I do get into conspiracy theories, and I've followed the conspiracies of JFK for many, many, many years. And so much so that I even went to Dallas and stood in front of the window where the shot was taken that had taken out, or supposedly had taken out, JF Kennedy. So we're going to talk about that tonight. But before we get into that, my guest, his name is David Sloan. His new book is How Key West Killed JFK. So we're going to bring JFK and Key West together. It's a really exciting topic, and I just can't wait to get into it. It's currently 62 degrees here in Las Vegas Valley. I hope everyone is well. I just got back from a trip in the mountains with a friend to do a little ghost hunting up in a remote gold mining camp. And we had a lot of paranormal activity happen to us while we were up there. Maybe I'll share that with you guys next week. We did catch a little bit of stuff, but yeah. It's just, I'm a little bit weirded out. So, and plus I've been sick. I've been out. I feel like I haven't seen you guys in a long time. I know Heidi's out there. She said she was listening. Greg, how are you doing? Hi, Joe Fox. It's nice to see everybody. I want to give a shout out to Sean Kelly. He has the show that's on before mine, Into the Night. And I don't know who his guest was tonight, but he comes on again on Sundays at 6 o'clock. So don't miss that. If you missed him tonight, he's on again at 6 on Sunday. So let's get into my guest. I just don't even want to go through the rest of these notes. We're not going to do that tonight. So I'm going to can that. I do have one more thing. So much thanks to Joe Montaldo. He is the owner of this broadcast. He's the one that runs the 107.7 FM New Orleans. So he is located in New Orleans. He does a lot of alien stuff. If you haven't heard from him, or maybe you think you've heard of his name and you're just not quite sure, it's because he's done a lot of stuff with Agent Aliens and things like that. You've probably seen him on the show or something like that. But my guest tonight, he's David Sloan. He's written a ton of books, and I mean a ton, including Robert Dahl, Protecting the Legacy of Robert Dahl. He is known for something else too, the history of key lime pie, which is my favorite treat. One of my birthdays here in Las Vegas, it was actually my last June, we ordered a pie directly from Key West from Kermit's. And when it arrived, it was like heaven on earth. I just love key lime pie and key limes in general. And the only place you can get these things is around the Key West area. You might be able to in Southern Florida. I'm not sure. Key West is in Southern Florida, I know, but it kind of seems like it's its own country for many reasons. but I have spent some time in the Keys a few years ago. So I'm a huge fan. I love Hemingway. I love that band of artists that are down there. There's some great artists down there right now. There's always been artists down there, though. So you had like Hemingway, you had Faulkner spent some time down there. Truman Capote, I think he was even friends with Hemingway for a while, but there was a big band of them. There was like Tennessee Williams, Capote, a bunch of them. But anyhow, let me get David on here. David Wick, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
So, Key West. There's so much to say about Key West.
Yeah, there really is.
So you just kind of packed your bags and moved there?
Yeah, I was born in Pennsylvania and raised in Dallas, and then college in Miami, hospitality management. And so I managed hotels through college, and then moved to managing cruise ships when I graduated. And I did that for about 4 years. But I saw a ghost tour in Scotland. And this is before there were ghost tours all over the place. I think there might have been one or two in the United States. I saw this ghost tour, and I saw how many people were going. I'm like, wow, these people are making a living telling ghost stories. That's what I wanted to do. I'd always been into the paranormal. So I ended up quitting my corporate job and eventually moving down to Key West and starting one of the first ghost tours in the country down here. And I feel very fortunate. I never thought, I'm going to move to Key West, but it's been very good to me.
Were people really receptive to it when you first moved there and did it?
No.
Yeah.
No.
That's
you have to consider 1996, people weren't talking about ghosts that much. A lot of times if you talked about ghosts, people thought you were crazy. And when I told people I was starting a ghost tour, it's so funny because so many of them just gave me that kind of look of a little bit of pity. And they're like, oh yeah, that's a neat idea. And then, 5 years later, when it was a big success, they were saying, yeah, I had that idea. I just never did it. So that was pretty interesting. But yeah. And so this year marks 30 years in Key West. So I'm very fortunate.
What drew you into the JFK assassination narrative?
It's interesting because I never considered myself like really big into the conspiracy theories, things like that. I mean, I appreciated them. And I think being raised in Dallas, I was 15 miles from where the assassination took place. I had been to the site before. I had been up in the school book depository. I used to buy my school supplies from the Sun Rexall, where Marina Oswald worked after the assassination. She wasn't there when I was, I don't think, but she lived very close to us. So a lot of that surrounded everything I was doing. So I think it was there. But then in Key West, I stumbled upon it by accident because we've got a fire chief here named Bum Farto. And people always laugh at the name. That was his name, Joseph Bum Farto. And in 1976, he was convicted of selling cocaine to an undercover agent in the firehouse. And before his sentencing, he disappeared. And he became the Jimmy Hoffa of Key West. So the big question for 50 years has been, where is Bum Farto? And a friend and I decided we're going to find him. So we got the FBI files. We started going through all of the different CIA files and things like that. And a lot of the names that we were looking into appeared in the JFK assassination files. What blew me away first was when I saw a report of Jack Ruby selling guns from an Islamorada motel room. And a pretty detailed report. And there were several witnesses, and the things they said, to me, there was too much detail for this to have been a rumor. And I thought, that's crazy. And then as I kept digging, I found something about Lee Harvey Oswald fueling up a boat at the Standard Oil docks in Stock Island. And Also a report of Lee Harvey Oswald calling Jack Ruby from somebody's house in the Keys. And to me, that was interesting. There's a report from the mayor at the time. The mayor said that Lee Harvey Oswald was staying at his hotel. And then what really did it, there's a very long report. And this is from the House Select Committee of Investigations. And Gaetan Fonzi did the interview with George Feraldo, who was our airport director. And he reported Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby together in the Key West airport, waiting to board a flight to Cuba with the Fair Play for Cuba committee. And you have to understand, George Feraldo is a very well-respected man. They named the street going in front of the airport here after him. Mm-hmm. And he went into so much detail. And he talked about Lee Harvey Oswald approaching Jack Ruby at one point and saying, when's the big bird going to arrive? And he thought it was some type of code. But the details, really incredible. And he said he took a photo of them and that he sent one of the photos to a news organization and that he had another copy himself. And Mr. Feraldo had passed away, but his wife was still alive. So I gave her a call and I asked her, I said, do you know what they're saying about your husband in these CIA reports? And she said, oh yeah, it's all true. And I said, you know about the photo? She says, yes, I still have the photo somewhere. And I asked her if I could come over and take a look at it. And she said, well, I'm going to have to dig it out because I have a lot of photos, but, and I'm not feeling really good right now, but when I'm feeling better, yes, you can certainly come over and we can take a look. And unfortunately she passed away before we had that opportunity. And it wasn't anything suspicious. She was, I think she was in her late 80s, I think. But that conversation, it made me realize that without a doubt, Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby were together in Key West.
That's interesting.
And it sent me down this incredible path with a lot of stuff that, it still blows my mind.
Now, the day it happened, I want to back up just a little bit to Dallas.
Yeah.
You said you've been in the depository building. Have you stood in front of the window where that shot was supposedly taken?
Yeah.
You would have to be a really good shot to shoot somebody moving like that twice on that angle.
Yeah. I'm not enough of a marksman. And I've seen I find with so much of the stuff that happened in Dealey Plaza, there are so many people that argue opposite sides. And they'll all have their evidence and they'll all back it up and they'll all make it very convincing. But it can all be very conflicting. And so I think it's interesting because without really being there, it's tough for anybody to be an expert and really know what happened. What I suspect went down that day, I think there were many, many people in Dealey Plaza who were involved. And I think there were many, many who were armed and who were prepared to shoot the president. I kind of think when that first shot went off, I bet there were a bunch of people going, what the hell? I was supposed to do that.
You didn't have a lot of enemies. You did.
So, and that's the way that the different, because there's different theories, the CIA, the mafia, the Russians, the Soviets, and no matter who you choose, these people knew that you had to have plausible deniability and they compartmentalized things. And so that way, they could have one team that's supposed to take down the president. Somebody else could have had the exact same team ready to go. And a lot of them didn't know what was going to happen until the last minute. So by having so many people involved, everybody can say, well, no, even if the evidence points towards them, it's easy to say it wasn't me. And then you have disinformation agents out there too. So there will be people planting these different theories. about who did what, because the more that is out there, the less people are likely to believe any of the theories. So
it's an interesting case. There's so many different ways that you can lean within these conspiracies, such as like you can take it toward the Cuban crisis, or you could take it toward the Teamsters at the time, the mob, certainly. But at what point in your research did you realize that this whole thing with Key West wasn't just a footnote? I know you just said that, but
at first, seeing Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby here was interesting, and that led me on this path where I started digging into. I'd been in Key West 30 years, and nobody ever talked about the JM Wave base, which was the largest covert CIA base in the world, and it was right at the gateway to the Keys. And I'm talking, they probably had 3,000 agents who were running another 15,000 Cuban exiles on their payroll, the third largest Navy in the Caribbean, and they're running all these attacks on Cuba through the Florida Keys. And nobody ever talked about that history. And another thing in Key West that nobody talks about is what a stronghold the Tampa Mafia had. And not just Tampa, Jimmy Hoffa developed probably a third of Key West. But nobody ever talks about it as an organized crime town. And organized crime was really detrimental to the island. And Key West had that live and let live attitude that we're famous for. But that allowed these characters to thrive outside of the law. So you had the CIA right up at the top of the Keys. You had Castro and the Soviets, closer to Key West than Miami. The U.S. was to Miami. And then the Tampa stronghold. So you had everybody making the Florida Keys their giant playground. And all of them had reasons to hate Kennedy. So I wanted to write a good beach read, something that someone could read at their hotel by the pool, that told this fascinating story about Key West during the Cold War era. But then as I did more and more and kept digging, one person who stood out was a Cuban baker. He was actually from Cuba. His mom was from Key West, and he came to Key West in 1960 and worked as a baker in a local bakery. He married a Key West woman, and he is a suspect in the Kennedy assassination. The FBI and the CIA both have him in their files. The night of the assassination, he crossed the Texas border into Mexico. And then a couple of days later, he boarded a flight to Cuba as the passenger. And there were urgent requests put out to find him because he was a suspect in the assassination. And the thing with this guy, the thing with Gilberto Lopez, he has so many parallels to Lee Harvey Oswald. And I'm not talking one or two. They look very much alike. They were both members of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. They both were in communist countries and then came to the United States. They both got into fights over their beliefs in communism. They both had disagreements with their wife shortly before the assassination and moved away from their wives. And the list goes on and on. So other researchers have claimed he was a second gunman. But the problem is none of them have been able to place him in Dallas. We know he crossed the border in Texas, but nobody could place him in Dallas. And then nobody was able to place him with guns. Nobody could say he had a history with guns. And I was looking at this guy. He went off the radar in 1964. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, he's got some answers. He's so much like Lee Harvey Oswald. If we can find him, he'll have the answers that Oswald could never tell because Oswald was killed so rapidly. So I planned a trip to Cuba. And I called my friend, Cheryl Sanders.
Wait, you actually went to Cuba? How did you get in there?
I was going to go search for him. So I called my friend Cheryl Sanchez Simmons, who's a great researcher. She does a lot of cold case stuff. I told her, I said, I want to go to Cuba and try to find this guy. I know you've got some connections in Cuba. Can you help me? And she ran some different reports, and she said, she called me back shortly later, and she said, David, you don't need to go to Cuba. He came back to the United States in 1995. And when I heard that, I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. How did this guy who's a suspect in the assassination of the president of the United States come back to the United States undetected? And he was living under his own name in Hialeah, Florida, in the pretty much the heart of the Cuban exile community. So something wasn't right. I thought, this guy's got to be CIA. He's got to be someone on the inside if he's able to return like that. Well, we also found out that he had passed away in 2021. So I wasn't going to be able to get answers from him. But he had a daughter. And I tracked her down. And I asked her if she'd be willing to talk to me. And I really didn't expect that she would. You know, who would want to talk about their dad being a suspect in the assassination of President Kennedy? But she was very willing to talk. And we had several conversations over the course of a month. And she shared some unbelievable things. And one of the main ones being that her dad had said, yes, he was in Dallas when the president was assassinated.
Oh, that makes sense.
So that's kind of huge. I mean, that's, you know, I wanted to write a basic story, but then getting that was incredible. I also tracked down Gilberto Lopez's brother-in-law. And when I talked to him, his name's Cookie Machine, and he's the most incredible guy. I went to Tampa to speak with him, and I told him I wanted to talk about Gilberto. He's like, yeah, sure. You know, come on up. And he didn't quite understand why I'd want to talk about him. But he told me, he said, yeah, you know, Gilberto was very secretive. He didn't like using his own name. He always felt like he was being followed. He didn't like talking on the telephone. And he said he worked at a restaurant, the Columbia restaurant in Tampa, which is a place that Santo Trafficante Jr., who was the head of the Tampa Mafia, that's a place that he used to frequent. And you know, through this, through his U.S. wife, I was able to make the connection between Gilberto and the Tampa Mafia. You know, he wasn't necessarily strictly working for them, but there was that association where he was definitely under their influence. But when I asked Cookie, I said, did you ever see Gilberto with guns? And he said, yeah, he had a duffel bag full of guns, but my sister wouldn't allow them in their apartment. You know, she told him to get rid of them. I said, did he ever talk about Dallas? And Cookie kind of looked at me. He said, yeah, they had a big argument about Dallas. Why are you asking me that? How did you know that? And I said, well, Cookie, you know that he's a suspect in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And Cookie's eyes got wide. And he goes, whoa! And he held his arm up for me. He said, look at that. Look at those hairs on my arm standing up. He goes, oh my God. He goes, you just blew my mind. So it was, to me, that was pretty meaningful to get the story about the guns and all the other information without Cookie knowing that he was a suspect in the assassination.
Yeah, that's interesting. He'll probably never talk to another journalist ever again, though. After that.
You know, it's funny because the Globe called me, and they wanted to do a story on it, and they told me they wanted to check my references. You know, since
right.
Since I'm not with like one of the corporate publishing houses, and so they actually spoke with Cookie and with Gilberto's daughter. And the way they published the story, it makes it like they found all the information out, which is pretty funny. So they did talk to other people, but it's really, I thought that was all interesting. And there was so much more that his daughter shared. And what this does, it pieced together, more than 60 years of missing history. And for us to have this new information, I was able to obtain the first photos of Gilberto Lopez. One photo of him existed where he was wearing dark sunglasses in the airport at night, and that was taken in Mexico City before he escaped to Cuba. But that could be anybody. But the way his face is obscured, I found his passport photo, so we know what he looked like just before the assassination. And then through his daughter, I was able to obtain photos of him throughout his life, from shortly after the assassination up until shortly before his death. So I think with those photos, that's going to be something that's going to help with the research into the assassination. I think there are going to be people who recognize him and say, oh, I know that guy. He was here. He did that. And the other thing that I uncovered, he had very strong, he was hardcore communist. And, he used to go around with a blackjack that he had fashioned out of the thick telephone cord or telephone wires. And he used to go out just to beat people who were anti-communists in Cuba. So
what a time.
Yeah. So I think when we look at this Key West Baker and everything about him, it opens up so many questions. And I think it confirms a lot about Lee Harvey Oswald. Something that I'm looking into right now, when Gilberto Lopez filled out his passport application to come over from Cuba to the United States, he put down 2 references. Both of those names appear on the list of people who crossed the border from Texas into Mexico City on the same day Lee Harvey Oswald did, about a month before the assassination. So if those 2 people, we know the names are there. I'm still working to prove that they are the same people and not somebody with a different, somebody with the same name. But if those people were all together, to me, that absolutely proves that
it absolutely does. I thought I read somewhere, and I could be wrong here, that Oswald didn't he go to school I thought he was in the military at some point, and didn't he have special training?
Yeah, and
things like that.
And I know there's some suspicion with him that he was giving the codes to the U-2 bombers, and that he was giving those to the Soviets. That's another thing I've been looking into. It was kind of buried in the news, but a couple of days before Kennedy was assassinated, there was a U-2 bomber that went down mysteriously near Key West. And Gilberto Lopez, we don't know if he was in the military, but we know that his brother was high-ranking in the Soviet Army, and we know that he had some cousins who were working for the Naval Air Station in Key West.
That's interesting. I thought so too. Wasn't there when he went to that school? I thought maybe it was, now that you mentioned it, I thought maybe it was around, where was it? It's either Mexico or Cuba that I thought I read that he had taken that training, and there was somebody else with him during that training that was involved in all this somehow. Like that name pops up somewhere too, and I can't remember exactly who it was. I could be.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure. There's probably 6 million pages, I believe, in the Kennedy assassination files, and so I obviously haven't gone through all of them. And I think there's so many different segments to the Kennedy assassination. And what I really did is focused on Key West, because Key West is what I know and what I love. And this is what I think was interesting. A lot of people have looked at these documents pertaining to Gilberto Lopez and to Key West, but without someone having intimate knowledge of the local landscape and the local names, there are things they'd miss. Stock Island is called Stark Island in one of the reports. The Topino family or Topino Construction Company comes up several times, but it's spelled differently by different agents. So sometimes I could read something and be like, okay, that's the same pilot here. So it's easier to connect some of the dots. And then the connection with to the Tampa Mafia that came, by looking at the name of Gilberto's wife and saying, "Oh, I know who she used to be married to." So there's some really interesting nuances in Key West, and I've really loved digging into that side of it. And one of the things in the book, I have my suspicions about what went down with who, but I steer clear of the argument about who fired from where, when. I do everything that leads right up to the time that they're there. And then the great details on Gilberto Lopez.
Got it. Well, why do you think Key West has been largely ignored in mainstream and within the JFK investigations?
That's a really good question. When Gaetan Fonzi did his investigation, he was saying everybody needs to look at Miami. So, and he probably did the best investigation that there was, the most thorough investigation at getting towards the truth. And Miami made a lot of sense with the CIA there.
It did.
So I think he was really saying South Florida. And then there were a couple of great writers and researchers. Mark Howell and Tim Gratz did some stories in Solaris Hill here, where they wrote about some of the connections between Key West and JFK. So they did that, and it was articles. And then Tim Gratz, I used to speak with him a lot, and he did a couple of books talking about some of the stuff. But for me, what was really groundbreaking was making the Tampa Mafia connection, and then all of the new information about Gilberto Lopez. It was really something else.
I kind of want to change gears just a little bit, but how did Operation Mongoose change the political and intelligence landscape in Key West?
Well, when the JM Wave base opened up, you got to think about the amount of money that started flowing through the Florida Keys and the number of people who were in the Florida Keys at the time who were benefiting from this. And Key West has always had a great relationship with Cuba. So many of the people in Key West are from Cuba, and the ferries used to go back and forth. And, so there was a lot of commerce, and really from Cuba to Key West over to Tampa. So there was all that going on. And then when the Tampa Mafia, they had everything going on with their casinos and everything with Batista. But then Fidel Castro comes along. And the interesting thing with Fidel Castro, people didn't know which way he was going to go. A lot of people, even in Key West, thought this guy's going to be really good, and he came to Key West. Fidel Castro came to Key West a couple of times. But when he came the second time to raise money for his revolution, the island was divided. And the chief of police here, he hated Castro. He wanted nothing to do with him because he had been friends with Batista. And so Castro wanted to follow in the footsteps of Jose Marti. And he wanted to speak at the places that Jose Marti did, because that would give him this power, it would give him that association. And anytime he lined up a place, the police chief shut it down and made sure it didn't happen. Castro ended up speaking at the dog track in Stock Island, which was financed by the Teamsters and Jimmy Hoffa. But he gave a speech over there and had his group of supporters. But as soon as he crossed back into Key West, they say he was arrested and that he was taken to jail. The local bail bondsman who worked for the Tampa Mafia bailed him out. Castro is said to have, and this is the way the Key West story goes, Castro skipped his bail, went over and was working on his revolution. They say that this bail bondsman from Key West, Terry Lee Garcia, they said that he went over to Cuba, found Castro in the mountains, and roughed him up and said, "You better give me my money," and got his money back. So you had people with different allegiances in Key West, And then when the time came when everybody started realizing, whoa, Castro is not the person we thought he was, everything became anti-communism. You got to shut that down. And that started once they opened up the jam ways, the money flowing through was ridiculous. I think they had like 400 front companies that they operated so that they could do everything covertly. And eventually it all led into this big thing where, they were importing, the mafia was importing illicit goods. It started back in Prohibition with liquor, but then it moved on to heroin and then different drugs at different times. But it became a thing where the CIA was involved with everybody, and you were selling drugs to make money to buy guns to take down communism. And
Interesting.
And it was a really interesting financial machine for all of the Florida Keys.
Well, do you feel like, though, in a way that the people who supported the communism kind of worked together with the CIA on the assassination of Kennedy?
I think a lot of people were working with a lot of people, and I think some people were being tricked. And I think other people were just going wherever the money was. There's a lot of talk that the people, because the CIA hired the mafia to send people in to kill Castro, and they were doing it, exploding cigars. They tried to poison him, and it never quite worked out. Like the poison that was supposed to go in his milkshake, they said that the pill kind of froze to the side of the walk-in freezer, and they couldn't peel it off. They had a scuba suit that they were going to poison with botulism, but it got mixed up, and he used a different suit. I don't think it's that hard to kill somebody. What I believe, and this isn't original to me, but when they shut down the casinos, when Castro shut down the casinos, Traficante was detained for a while, and then he was released. They say that Jack Ruby went over there and paid a bunch of money to get him out. But there's a theory that he made a deal with Castro and that they were still working together, and that he might have been telling Castro about these assassination attempts so that they could be avoided. Because I tried to kill somebody that many times and fail.
Yeah, that's true.
That's extremely incompetent.
Right. Or just lucky. Maybe the guy was just lucky.
I think there is more to it.
I mean, they tried to assassinate Hitler a couple of times, and each time he seemed to skirt it somehow.
Yeah.
So you never know.
Yeah, anything's possible. Yeah, that's what looking into this made me realize is, anything is possible. There's so much crazy stuff going on. And you look at the people who were involved, and these were a bunch of kids running around, fighting for control of the world.
Yeah. If he wasn't the trigger point in all of this, was it part of concealment that followed Dallas?
I'm sorry, say that again. I didn't quite understand.
For the cover up of all of this, like if Key West wasn't the trigger point for everything, was it part of the concealment that followed Dallas? I
think the cover up was planned right along with the assassination, and I think that is why things are compartmentalized and the plausible deniability that we talked about. It's interesting because with Kennedy, there were attempts. There's what has been characterized as attempts on his life in Chicago and Tampa and Miami before he was in Dallas. I don't think that those were failed attempts. I think they were practice runs. I think a lot of the people involved were in each of those places. And each time, the calls, the way that they were reported are a little suspicious. So I think these calls were intentionally put in to see how different agencies would react when there was a threat on the president's life.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah. So, when they were in Chicago, there were some calls that came in. I think it was a guy named Leon or Leo, like they were trying to make it sound like it was Lee Harvey Oswald. And then it was some Cuban exiles that were found with some guns, but then it's suspicious about who gets questioned and who gets released. Then when they were in Miami, there was somebody that said, somebody I think who was with the Klan or one of the white supremacist groups, and he said that he had a tip that they were going to take Kennedy out and they were going to shoot him from one of the buildings. They were going to shoot down on his motorcade. It's interesting because when Kennedy was in Miami, he was being, some of the security were some of the Cuban exiles who later turned out to be suspects in the assassination. And then the same thing in Tampa, these calls come in. So I think people were watching, and Gilberto Lopez, the Key West baker, he was living in Tampa, and he was there when Kennedy's motorcade came through. He attended a Fair Play for Cuba committee meeting that day. There's evidence that indicates that Lee Harvey Oswald could have been at that same meeting. And then, we know what happened in Dallas. And Gilberto Lopez left Tampa, took a Greyhound bus to Dallas. He was in Dallas during the assassination. And then when he crossed the border, it's interesting because they closed the borders immediately after the assassination. When they opened them back up, during the time that he crossed over, they noted the license plates of everybody who crossed during that 24-hour period. And I went through all of the different license plates and the names that were associated with them and did deep dives on each person. And the one name that I found interesting is George de la Garza. And that name appeared in one of the intelligence reports where the KGB assassin had been making calls to him as an insurance agent and was talking to him. This memo talks about double speak and about how everybody in the KGB and the Russian embassy knew, or Soviet embassy knew, that they were being listened to. So they'd have code words. So this conversation about insurance was in the same report about doublespeak, and it's the same name, George de la Garza. So does that mean somebody working with the Soviets is the one who took Gilberto Lopez across the border? Because it says Lopez was a passenger in someone else's car.
Oh, wow.
So everything I'm finding connects him to the Tampa Mafia, and then to Castro and to the Soviets. And then his return to the United States makes you think, okay, there's some CIA in there too.
Yeah. Yeah, because how would he have gotten over or come back over?
Yeah. And it was something interesting that his daughter said when they left, he never told his family that he had citizenship and that they'd be able to go to the United States. So when his wife found this out, she's like, whoa, why the hell didn't you tell us? And so they started filling out the paperwork, and apparently it took a couple of years. She said that the night before they were supposed to leave, 3 men who she described as men in black, wearing the suits, and she said, like the movie, she said they came to their house and warned them that if they tried to return to the United States, that they might be arrested. She said that when they were at the airport, her father was pulled aside and taken into a back room, and the mother was very concerned and said, oh no, this probably has to do with the president. We might not be able to get there. But they did. But there was something going on.
Wow. Are there other documents out there that are files that are still sealed that could further implicate the Key West area?
I'm sure there are. I did a lot of, I've done a lot of FOIA requests, and it's interesting because some of the FOIA requests, I've done the names before, and I'm doing them to see if there's anything new. And even the old information that I've gotten before, they say isn't available. With Gilberto Lopez, I got one request back, and it said that that some of the information that I've requested has been destroyed.
Mm.
So I think there's other stuff out there, and stuff turns up all the time, and and it's understandable. I don't think it's necessarily a conspiracy when you're dealing with 6 million pages of files that were done back when people were typing and mimeographs and stuff. That's a lot of paperwork, and so to have all that digitalized and available and searchable, I have no doubt that there's more stuff out there.
This was a bit of a personal question. All this research that you did into this, it just overlaps so many different aspects to our American power, culture, and everything. Has it changed how you view American power and secrecy in any way?
I don't think so. I've never really cared much for authority.
I don't think so. Yeah.
No, I've never really cared much for authority, and I think there's a lot of corruption everywhere, and I usually try to keep to my own little world and live my own little life, and try to influence what I can directly around me. And with this book, I really did just want to write the cool beach read about Key West, and I'm still blown away by what it became. So. Yeah, and now I just kind of, it's funny because when I was writing the column about Bumfardo, I was documenting my stuff in the Key West Weekly, and I wrote about a member of the Tampa Mafia who was tied in with all the Bumfardo stuff, and I got an email from his grandson making it very clear that he did not like what I had to say about his grandfather.
I was just going to ask you, that was my very next question. Do you ever fear that you're getting too close to something kind of dangerous?
Well, when that happened, I looked at that and I was freaked out. I'm like, God, I was trying to tell a story. And, and that's one of the things. I'm not out to hurt anybody. I realized that everybody involved is a human, and, who knows what their motivation is? Who knows what events in their life have led them to be where they are? So I don't think anybody sets out in life to be a bad person. And I think most people are actually doing the best they can, and they come from different circumstances. So I've always tried to pay attention to the human element in the people that I'm writing about. I don't want to make anybody out to be a bad guy. There's other people who say that Gilberto Lopez is the second shooter. I'm not comfortable saying that. I'm comfortable saying he was there and he had guns, and that he was violent, and the things that have been said about him. But he's a human. He's a human. He had a wife. He had kids. He had parents who were abusive towards him. So you don't know what did that. So circling back, I stopped writing the Bumfardo column. If you go back through the old Keys Weekly articles, you'll notice that it just stops. And that's because for me, it wasn't worth continuing that story. To put myself at risk, or to put my wife at risk, or anything like that. So I stopped cold. And for a long time, I took a rest on that. But the JFK stuff kept coming back. And then when I made these discoveries, I tried to reach out to anybody who might have known Gilberto Lopez. I talked to the daughter, which was a great source. I reached out to all of his brothers, his other children, and nobody responded. So in the book, I said, hey, if you're related to him and you disagree with any of this, please reach out to me and I'll update the book, because I do want to get the dialogue going, and I do want to hear from other people.
Right.
And so putting the stuff out about Kennedy, I think most of the people are dead. Most of the people are dead who would want to kill you. So, and there's been so many people who've talked about the assassination, so I don't feel as at risk for that.
Right.
I think there is some, but when you look at it, the assassination of the president of the United States is a huge deal. And so I think that does supersede certain things. And that's why I did feel it was important to put this out, even if there are risks, which again, I don't think I'd be important enough to anybody involved.
So where can people find your book?
If people want to get an autographed copy, phantompress.com, like Phantom, just like Phantom of the Opera, but phantompress.com, and I'll sign it for you. I'll personalize it, any of that good stuff. And then, of course, the regular outlets, it's on Amazon. If you're in Key West, the local bookstores have it. And I'm usually at the artisan markets on Sundays, and they do another market at the Truman Waterfront on Thursdays. So I'll be there if you want to come by and shoot me.
No, not on this show.
Shoot me with a camera.
No, not at all. You also, your ghost tours. I want to talk about your ghost tours real quick.
Yeah.
You run the Key West ghost tours. Is it Sloan Key West ghost tours?
Sloan's Key West ghost tours. How
do people find that? And can you name a couple places that you go?
Yeah. So if people go to ghostkeywest.com, and what I do now, there were so many ghost tours going around downtown. So I always thought with ghost tours, like, what do you want? You want to go inside. So we do tours inside the fort with Robert the Doll, and that's called Robert the Doll After Dark. And we do tours inside America's Most Haunted Firehouse. And we do a UFO tour, which goes into this crazy UFO history in Key West. And we've got this $4,000 military night vision scope that opens up the skies like you would not believe. People look through and they're like, whoa. So we do small groups, like we'll take 6 people out to one of the piers on the ocean, because they say that there's an underwater UFO base here, and we see stuff right above the surface and up in the sky, and we'll talk about the cool history there. So we do those 3 things all inside. We're one of the more high-end ghost tours here. Most people think everything's the trolley because there's a ghost trolley driving around. And
I think the ghost trolley is in every town these days.
Yeah, and that's cool. That's more the mass market. We're more the upscale one, kind of like the Velvet Rope ghost tours and UFO tours.
I'm definitely going to come do a tour the next time I'm in Key West.
Yeah, you need to come back.
That underwater alien base that you're talking about, that's interesting because there's one in San Diego as well.
Okay.
So if it's marking the most southern points of the U.S. like that,
that'd be interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and ours, the history is pretty cool because it goes back to like 1918. The naval base here was established the same year that Thomas Edison came down. And after Ancient Aliens, the first modern sightings, when people saw them, they called them mystery airships because they didn't have terminology. And everybody said Thomas Edison's behind it. He's the smartest man in the world. He's got to be behind it. And Thomas Edison said, no, you're all seeing things because that technology doesn't exist. And then one of these mystery airships dropped an encrypted tube with strange writing on it and said, deliver this to Thomas Edison. And then everybody's like, we told you it was Thomas Edison. And that's when they started like oh no, you're crazy. They started like, you're seeing little green men, huh? And they institutionalized a couple of people and blasted it through the paper to try to stop anybody from talking about these mystery airships. And then right after Thomas Edison tells them they're crazy, he comes to Key West and patented like 42 top secret inventions, most of them that dealt with warfare just below the surface of the ocean or just above the surface of the ocean, which could be for submarines, of course, but it could also work well for craft that are going above and below the ocean.
That's really interesting. I never knew that. So that the Thomas Edison, the spirit phone that he created, do you think he was trying to communicate with aliens?
I don't know. It's possible. The spirit boxes that are out there that everybody uses for ghost hunting, those were created first to communicate with aliens. So I think anything's possible.
Very interesting. Well, David, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for taking the time to come talk to me.
Thanks, CL. This has been great. I really appreciate you having me on. And I appreciate, I didn't get to say hello to everybody in the comments, but I saw some friends in there. So thank you for stopping in.
Yeah, we can give a shout out real quick. We have a couple
Greg
minutes.
was there, Michelle's there. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, he says, was Oswald a Marine?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so too. He also says he has your book.
Yeah, Greg was just down in Key West a few weeks back.
He was talking about your ghost tours. And then we have Tabitha. She's a long time.
Yeah, hi, Tabitha. Nice to see you again.
Heidi here. She's a long time listener as well.
Hi, Heidi. Great.
Oh, she's saying hi to somebody else. Sorry.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Mark.
Michelle Rose says Robert Dahl is the bomb. So is the Firehouse.
Yeah. Yeah. Eminem Paranormal.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Everybody's been fun tonight. I appreciate you all giving me time.
Thank you. So you've been listening to The Gateway, broadcast from the edge of the Mojave where the strange slips through the crack, live from United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM, New Orleans. Thank you to my guest, David Sloan. You know where to find him. I'm going to post his stuff all over Facebook. Go buy his book. He's a great guest, isn't he, guys? I just love talking to him. So I will see you all again next week. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to the Gateway Podcast. Most importantly, Eerie Expeditions Magazine is going to make a return here shortly. So stay tuned for that. Subscriptions are free. So if you go to erieexpeditionsmagazine.com, you can sign up for free. You'll get a free online subscription and access to all of the media on the back end of it. So don't miss out on that. And until next time, thank you.